Head of Hornbill. I'd like to welcome and thank you for joining today's webinar, where we will be looking at getting started with SLAs and managing escalations with Chris Ware, Application Consultant here at Hornbill. Just to inform you, delegate audio will be muted during the presentation to facilitate flow and timekeeping. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type into the GoToMeeting question facility on the right-hand side of your screen. We will collate the questions and answer them at the end of the presentation. Thank you very much for taking the time to attend. I will now pass you over to Chris.
Good morning. Thank you, Anna, for the introduction. Yeah, my name's Chris. I'm a member of the professional services team here at Hornbill. My key role is to work with our customers to implement and get more out of their Supportworks system. So today we'll be looking at the functionality with the SLAs, the principles behind them, and their setup in Supportworks so that we can get the most out of that. We'll also go into a bit more detail on the escalation functions within a priority, and what this provides and how this can be of benefit and how it can assist with our call handling. So a few questions that I want to consider as we're going through this. First of all, we'll look to cover what is an SLA, why do we have SLAs, what are we actually capturing in an SLA, and then lastly, how do we reflect that in Supportworks. I'm going to cover the escalation elements a bit later on as we go through. So we'll build up a picture of our SLA and then look at the details of the priorities and the escalation functions that are available on that. So what is an SLA? I found a little quote that sort of feel that it summarized it quite nicely. So an agreement between the service provider and a customer that captures and details the level of service provided by the service desk to the customer, with service level targets and responsibilities of both parties included. So there's lots and lots of comments and papers around service level agreements, and it's important to use the elements and the areas that meet the needs of your business. So I think this summarizes it quite well. And this is going to be true whether we're talking about one service that we provide on our service desk, for example, or whether we provide a whole range of services, and whether we break each one down into separate agreements, or whether each particular service we provide is encompassed in one. So one of the things I find when we're looking at SLAs is it's an agreement in a name, but is it agreed in reality? So before we start to look at our service management application and setting the SLA in the system to be used against our calls and processes, we have to have something to configure and put in. So the name of the SLA includes an agreement, and this by nature means that the parties involved need to have agreed what is in place. So our customers need to agree that the service that we're offering is being provided, and likewise the service provider, in our case ourselves on the service desk, actually can meet the targets given and perform that service. And if the customer knows that what's in place. So who have we actually discussed the SLA with? Is it a key group of people? Is it a set of stakeholders in that? There's going to be either one or two people from each side, if you like, that are going to need to come together, look at what needs to be provided, and then actually discuss the elements as to how we can go about delivering that on the service desk. So from a service desk point of view, is the requirements that they have achievable? Can we actually deliver that? Can the targets that the customer have be met? Do we have the resource to be able to deliver and meet that? And if the service that's being provided, if there's an issue with it, can the business continue to have to deliver what it needs to and any issue have a minimal impact. And lastly, the SLA needs to be documented, and it should be amended until the agreement is in place and before the service shall start. So it might seem like a bit of an overkill for an internal organisation, but hopefully the benefits come clear as time progresses and the document's an important reference. And it's always going to be a live, living document that will change over a period of time. So why do we have SLAs? SLAs are mutually beneficial. So working together when an agreement's in place and the expectation and objectives are clear to both parties creates a much easier working environment. The customer should know what they're paying for, if they are paying for it, or if it's part of the absorbed cost of the business. And the provider needs to know what they're providing. So expectations are there as to what's in place and what is being provided. It enables those customers using the service to request what they need and know what they're entitled to be supported on. It's also the service provider has a backup there to be able to tune their processes and make sure that the delivery is being done efficiently without having to divert off to provide services and deal with issues that they may not actually be equipped to do so. A well-structured SLA document and an agreement can provide basis to feedback with reports on performance, making sure that these reports actually back up what the service desk are doing, making sure that any perceived negativity that comes through, or if there is a poor experience, making sure that that doesn't become the overall perception of the service desk, when actually there is clear evidence that 99% of the time the service is a good and the desk is performing well. It also prevents unrealistic SLAs and targets being set. So ad hoc requests and services that are asked are reduced. When we have our reports, we can actually review that and aim to include continued improvements. So there might be new services that come on board as part of that agreement, or that there may be a new requirement to deal with something quicker. And we can also include to make sure that resourcing is suitable, we've got the right size team, are the people put in the right place, and if we do have a team of a certain size, the actual team is justified if the service is being met. You might say that as an organisation or a team there's no formal agreement or need for a formal agreement in place, but there's a probability that either the service desk feel they have too much to do or need more staff, or the business perceives the service desk to be underperforming. Maybe if that's the case, it might be time to look at drawing one up. So what information do we need to capture when we're detailing our SLA? It depends on your organisation and the support you provide. As I said earlier, it might be one document, or it might be several documents and each element agrees. But each agreement and each document should detail key things such as who supported, whether that's configuration items, devices, pieces of software, services, individual request fulfillment, applications that are out there in the business, and of course people who are our people that we're looking after. We also need to capture who owns this document and signs it off on behalf of the provider and the customer. So if there needs to be a review, they're the people that actually get referred to maybe go back and discuss that further, or if there's an issue in the business, they can actually go and speak to that person who can then liaise with the service provider. We need to be able to detail when the service is being provided. So is it between certain business hours? Does the business have a need for extended support on certain things? And if so, how can they be facilitated? How are we going to prioritise and manage our issues? And what are going to be our indicators of performance there? So do we have some specific targets to work to? The review period. How often do we actually review our service level agreements with our customers? We might have this thing in place where we put our service desk in a period of time ago, and actually, at that time, that was the SLA, but have we actually sat down and made sure that it is meeting the needs of the business? The SLA shouldn't be agreed and then just assume that it's all working okay. Reviews manage to enable to see whether there's any pain points, whether perception is correct against the statistics, and ensure that it's working for both parties. I say, as a document that's living, it might bring other services as needed as the business develops. There's always that danger of, if you don't review these things, services may have crept in, and the extension of the desk may have had to adapt to that, and you've possibly done it, but can the actual service desk, in its way it's structured and the way it is and the resource that's available, actually meet that business need? Third-party contracts. Well, one area I've experienced being missed is, particularly around response and resolution targets and our prioritizations, is the potential need for involving a third party. If the incident that gets raised is referred to a third party, can the fixed target still be met? If the business requires a guaranteed fix in a certain time, they actually may need to improve the service provided from the third party, go on to their higher level, shorter turnarounds, same business day, those sorts of things. And lastly, if we're looking at starting to build up a new SLA, we can capture the discussions in a service level requirement, and that SLR can then be associated to our SLA once it's been created, to view the historical requirements and the discussions that led to the SLA being built. So I'm just going to run through in Supportworks how all of this information is actually captured and where, so that we can see that data. And hopefully we'll see that it's matching up one to the other. So if you go into Administration, Managed Service Level Agreements, I've got a demonstration SLA here, which just shows all of this data and how it may be displayed. So this is our overall encapsulation of our agreement with our customer, now being reflected in Supportworks to then be used by our analysts and by our teams. So we can name it, we can define this type, we can detail the description that comes around it, and if we go across the top here, we can see whether operational level agreements are included in there to pass down between our teams. We've got our services and configuration items that are actually associated to that, so whether this SLA covers certain devices and services. Specifically filtering out our services there as well to be able to show that this SLA is actually covering particular business functions and applications. If we've got any organizations that it covers, so out to the main organization. Any customers specifically assigned this SLA. Any active requests that have been used on this one, so we can actually see what calls have been logged to this SLA. An audit trail, so that as time progresses through the life cycle of this agreement, where things have changed, where things have been added, so we can see who did it, whether it was actually captured, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to go into the details of the thresholds, but this gives us a way of capturing our availability management elements of up and down time required, and making sure that we meet our needs there. And as I lastly mentioned on our captured information, the service level requirement of actually what was discussed before this SLA came to life, the functionality that was required from the business, targets that may be needed, and all the areas of the service and the availability and that goes in there. We can log discussions that take place on that as that built up, and also attach references and documents that are building that up, and you'd expect to maybe see the overall service level agreement document put in place on there. Just going back to our details tab, so we then have our other areas that we can associate and link here. So our fix and response targets, so different prioritizations that can go on there, which will then be assigned to give targets for the calls. Whether we have a priority matrix, again I'll go into this in a little bit more detail later on. References, again storing documents, other contracts, signed off bits that maybe need to be referred to later on, and so you have it all in one place. Defining our review periods, so we have a monthly review here, and that's active at the moment. So the next review for this particular SLA is on the 6th of April. It's going to be an early start for the IT owner and the business owner there at 1 AM, but maybe they might need to rearrange that one. And when that meeting has actually taken place, we can actually capture the details of our review, which one it was, who organised it, and then any notes around that, reports discussed, etc., etc. And then any associated third-party contracts. So you have to have your third parties set up in your structure to be able to accommodate that. So there's a lot of information captured there, which hopefully enables you to translate your document that you build up in advance and actually put that in so that it can be used by the service desk to run this particular service level agreement. Okay. So going on from there into some more detail, and that will then focus on how calls are handled more specifically. We'll have a look at the priorities and how using this along with escalations can help us manage our fix and response targets and the times that are associated with those. So how are priorities used? We use our priorities to help the service desk prioritize the calls that they have in their queue. In the most basic terms, enabling analysis to decide which call to work on first, with the principle being that a higher priority call, certainly in incident management, will be having a bigger effect on the business being able to output and work efficiently and meet their output on that. Priorities have response and fix times. each priority also records when the clock will tick, so our service desk opening hours. By being able to define by priority, it means that you may have higher priorities that may have a 24/7 clock against them, as opposed to lower priorities which sit within standard working hours. Each priority can have its own individual escalation set up against it, and we'll cover this a bit further on. So why do we have response and fixed targets? It enables us to do a couple of things. Setting a customer expectation that the desk has their issue under control, and it provides a measurable element to put a standard against to see how things are progressing through. So we can then use that to report and feedback and make sure that we are actually meeting the needs of the business in that respect. One discussion I quite often have is what actually classes a response. It could be whatever you decide it to be. So is it answering the phone? As soon as you answer the phone and log the call, you have responded to that particular customer, so you effectively should meet your response target in doing so. Whether we have followed that up on an email and actually gone back to the customer to let them know that we're dealing with our request, or if they've logged it via email, we can obviously use autoresponder, but also a follow-up phone call to actually let a customer know that we're dealing with that. It depends on the culture of your business and how you actually work with those. How do priorities relate to an SLA? You can only assign one priority to one SLA. You can only assign a priority to one SLA. Obviously, you can have more than one priority against each SLA, but that priority can only be used once. If you have a similar priority and it's needed on a different SLA, you actually have to create further priorities. So let's have a look at actually creating that priority and how we can assign it to an SLA and use our targets. So I'm going to stick with our SLA that we looked at here. We've already got 3 priorities associated to this one, and I'm going to add a P4 into this one as well. I could use the existing priorities that are associated, but I'm going to just create a new one as we go, and we'll just call this a P4, and this is going to have a 16-hour response, keeping the naming convention consistent with the other priorities. So I could put our fixed time, response time, and then our fixed time as well. We could specify that in days as well, so we could actually say that's going to be a 10-day fix, and then it'll translate the number of hours based on those, which is based on the support hours that are required. So this one's a Monday to Friday through till 5 o'clock in the evening. Once I've created that priority, it will then be available for me to just associate and add into our SLA. This will then enable us to pop it into our impact and urgency matrix, and again, worth us defining how we can use this way of defining our call priority. So instead of the service desk having a call and the customer saying, all right, I feel this needs to be logged as a P2, we can actually use further criteria to help us make that decision. So taking away the more arbitrary nature of and a bit finger in the air, we can actually use the impact and urgency to help us decide whether actually what the customer is saying is actually true. So I've drawn up a sample impact and urgency matrix here, which if the impact on the business is critical and the urgency of it is extremely urgent, which all of our customer issues are extremely urgent every time, as we know, then it will get logged as a P1. Hopefully, this would be few and far between. So the analyst can ask the customer who is being impacted. So is it their team? Is it just themselves? And trying to get that true indication. And then whether, is it affecting multiple systems, and whether it's something that is urgent. So it might be urgent for the customer, but actually only impacting them, which means it's of high urgency and low importance, which means it would get logged in this sample as a P5. And what you define as a P5 is obviously up to you, and you might look at just adjusting this matrix to have a little bit more of a range, or putting other things to sort of say, well, high and high is P2 as well, and adjusting it that way. But using this matrix gives us that ability to help make that decision. What it can also do is use the impact and urgency via self-service, so that customers can actually define their impact and urgency when they're logging an incident on your self-service, which then automatically will assign the priority. If you're doing that, then some discretion may be required, so that they can't necessarily suss out or just provide critical and extreme, so that they know that will log it as a P1. May want to actually get them to qualify that with what's displayed. So is this affecting everybody? A good example of an incident being logged and using an impact and urgency is if the payroll system is being logged. If we're logging the call on sort of towards the end of the month, just before payroll is being run, it's going to affect everybody in the business, and it's pretty urgent, because at the end of the day we all like to be paid. But once the run is completed, and we've got another sort of 3 or 4 weeks before we need to run it again, if that same issue came up, the urgency would be lower, but obviously the impact is still the same. So service desk would be able to prioritise their calls under other things, which may be more business affecting in the short term. So starting to look at escalations. Who we're going to escalate to, what we're going to escalate, and when. We've got 2 forms of escalations in service management. Functional escalations, so passing incidents or problems higher up to a different team, so an individual that might be more specialised in the area that the call relates to. We're not necessarily going to have everybody being an expert in every area. So in order for us to meet our service level, we're actually going to pass this to somebody who could bring it to a resolution much easier. So we'll pass that to a different team. In Supportworks, it might be more appropriate to build this into your business process, so that your calls, especially incidents, get directed properly. The other type of escalation we have is hierarchical escalations. So when we need to get senior members of staff involved, or make sure that account managers or service delivery managers is aware that there's an issue, so that we can actually get involved in progress that and make sure that that's controlled properly. Making sure that customer expectations are managed, so that we can deal with that in that way. So how do we look at creating and managing those in Supportworks? We've got a few different functions in escalations that help support our call management. So, because after all, we want to be able to avoid the customer having to escalate their call themselves because it hasn't been dealt with. it should only be once a fixed target has passed. A customer should be able to come back and escalate a particular issue. Because if we've provided that information, their expectations are set that actually I'm going to get that resolved in the next couple of days. So we can add that in. So a priority can have multiple escalations at different times, whether it's against a call that's been unresponded or unresolved. And our times are set up to be the amount of time before the response or the fix is actually reached. So potentially 4 hours before the fixed target is reached, we actually have some sort of escalation that says, hang on a minute, you're getting quite close to this missing the SLA, which then gives us the ability to prompt some sort of action that enables us to work on the call and hopefully avoid it breaching its SLA. So the functions that we've got available, we could have some email notifications, Supportworks messenger notifications. We can use progress level bars and call conditions to sort of visually indicate how the call is progressing. Call transfers, so there's our functional escalations in there. Most of them hopefully are fairly self-explanatory. I'm going to go through some detail on email notifications and the level indicators and how we can actually configure those. So we'll start with levels and conditions. So we can align through priorities to give good indicators against the call as to how they're going and how they may be progressing through. So we can see here we have 3 different priorities. The P1 is progressing quicker down towards its response or fixed target, and the P2 are following on behind. And we can see how, as time progresses and the call goes forward, these actually go through, and you'd expect to see towards the end of the fixed time or the response time, depending on where you set it up, that actually they might be nearing its priority. So you can quickly see that you might be needing to deal with something sooner than something else. Conditions give us another way of visualizing the call and how that is. So you can then relate that back across to how you work in your system. If we just have a look at how that actually portrays in Supportworks, looking at our service desk, this one's particularly inefficient. There's lots of red and yellow there indicating that actually we might be missing something. There's a nice green one there. So hopefully that one will get dealt with in the right amount of time. So if we're using emails to help us escalate, it's generally going to be to notify somebody who potentially isn't looking at those calls as actively as the service desk might. So we have to look at who we're actually going to notify and who we're going to want to keep informed. We could also use them to prompt a call owner, a second or third line team member who isn't necessarily going into the system as regularly as maybe the service desk, or we could actually sort of use them to trigger a hierarchical escalation to a manager or a group of managers. So we've got 2 email functions in Supportworks against an escalation. So if we have a look, we can send an email to a specific person in the address book. So this would be regardless who owns the call, what it's impacting, think it's just saying for this particular priority, this person will always get notified at this stage during the escalation that we're nearing a point. A more advanced function is to actually email a person in a particular role. So we can actually trigger a group of people, and it's always going to be dependent on who the call is with to actually see who is going to get that notification. So you can see here we've got different roles that are defined, and that will be dynamic based on where the call is and who it's with. So we've got customer, owner, a group manager. So that would be someone with the attribute against their analyst role. That would be in the group that the call is with, who has a group manager privilege. Line manager would be the customer of the call's manager. The account manager would be the call customer's organization account manager. We'll get there in the end, down the hop. And we could also have the analyst line manager. So this requires relating a customer record for the customer in a customer database. So if it's matching your analyst records with your user DB in Supportworks. So ITSM 3.5 has these defined roles when the application is installed, and these can be added to if you actually need to. That's actually triggered using the VPME script and a verb in the escalation. So if we just have a look at that in our P4 that we've just created, and actually have a look at our escalation triggers, we can actually create one of those here to actually put in. So we'll maybe do it halfway through. We can create an escalation 40 hours before the fix is needed. So we could send an individual email to a person, so this person would always get notified. Or we could use the escalation notification VPME script and just populate that in here and say we'll notify the owner. And you can comma separate these to have the different roles that you've defined in there to actually include those as well. We could put our level notifications against this one as well. And that would be simply creating an escalation against that. I'm just going to dive back to the SLA screen to show you where the escalation emails are. And these are already predefined in, say, 3.5, and just use a series of criteria to actually to build that up, and a template that you can assign from your bulk email templates. How you do that is actually detailed in the help files as well. So that will give you a view on how to include that. So just to round off this session, just obviously there's no point in putting all of this information in if we can't actually get it out. And I'm not going to go through creating any of these particular reports, but we've got various functions in Supportworks that enable you to report back. So we've got our system reports to be able to build lists, group lists, and other reports that you run or schedule. And you can pick your columns and put in criteria and variables that enable us to pull off that information. And we've also got the dashboard reports that have been available in Supportworks 7.6.2 onwards, which enable us to build real-time dashboards showing trends and statistics and more graphical visualization that you might be putting on your on your screen. So here we've got different calls via different priority or over how many calls that have missed their SLA on a particular day, and build that trend up. I'd advise having a look at the Academy and the training videos that relate to these to help you to build those up and to get more information on there. We can have a look in Supportworks how these are actually displayed, just to show you those samples I've put together. So I run report for all my unresolved incidents past the fixed time. I'm just using there. There's quite a lot that are actually giving us those in there, or we may look at our dashboard and trending to actually have a look at some statistics there based on particular SLAs or priorities, or how particular teams are performing. So whether the first line actually need to get their finger out because they've missed the resolution on 102 calls over time. And you can build those up based on your widgets and information that way. So watch the videos on those ones, and that will help those. So that wraps up all the areas that I wanted to cover on how we get our SLA into Supportworks and get started in building those up and running our escalations. So yeah, hopefully if there's any questions that are being passed through, we can have a look at those.
Thank you, Chris. Just a reminder, if you do have any questions, feel free to use the go-to meeting facilities on the right-hand side of your screen. Type that in, and Chris will happily answer them for you. Don't seem to have any questions in just yet, but in the meantime, if you do have questions that you sort of remember after the session or after watching the recording, do feel free to contact myself or your relationship manager, and we'll sort that out. We have just had one come through. Could you show logging a call and setting priority?
Okay. Yeah. That's nice and straightforward. So we can go into an incident. So we can set our customer, and we'll use our demo SLA. This one actually, this particular customer has a customer SLA against it, so it's picked up that they've got the corporate service desk. We could obviously change that. If you've only got one SLA, then that would reduce that list down. So my demonstration data has a lot more. Going into the demo SLA, and we'll pick a impact and urgency, which will then pick our priority, which we defined within our SLA impact matrix, priority matrix. The medium and medium becomes an 8-hour response, which in this case it is. So I've been able to ask that customer, how are you being impacted? What's the urgency of this? We've got a presentation in 5 minutes. Okay, we'll up that priority, based on that. And if it's set up, it will actually change that priority within there. That will then, when we log that one, if I log and accept it, it will obviously meet the response time, but it will give us our targets and our fixed targets, and then kick in with how the priority will be managed and whether any escalations get kicked off from there.
Thank you, Chris. We haven't received any more questions, so I will close today's session. Just to let you know, the recording will be made available on the customer forum through the Supportworks YouTube channel later on today, hopefully. Thank you very much for everyone for attending today, and I hope you're able to attend our next Hornbill Academy on the 14th of May. The topic will be BPME. Thank you.